everyone, it's Marianne from Yarnworx Studio, and today I'm bringing you a brand new pattern of mine. It's called the Moxie Block Blanket, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I came up with it, the construction of it and the materials, and then I'll have a full tutorial video that you can watch for each step of the blanket. So first, I'll show you what it looks like, the finished product. It's hard to get into a video frame, but it's a large color block Afghan full size. So it's about 60 inches by 48 inches total. It's got 3 colors that are put together in different strips, and no 2 colors actually touch each other, but they all blend really well together. It has a thin border that you can thicken a little bit if you want to, depending on your aesthetic. And it's comprised of just 2 stitches. It's crocheted. And it's really warm and fuzzy. So I'll tell you first a little bit about how I've come up with it. So just to get started, this was my little test schematic that I made. I wanted to build something color block with some texture, not too holey, because sometimes when your blankets have really a lot of holes in it, your toes get stuck and things like that. So something that's really nice and accessible and easy to use and can look great in sort of any modern or traditional space. You can really play with the colors here. So using my test, it's just a little easier to see. When I made this one, I really loved it, but what I didn't like about it was I found it just a little bit too linear and boxy. So you'll find with the final pattern, what I ended up doing was making it so that it gets a little more shape, and it'll make it a little more unique, and that's where the Moxie from the pattern really comes from, is playing with sort of some different sort of wavy shapes while still making it a really simple and easy crochet project to take on. So I'll tell you how we make it first, and then I'll talk about the materials. So it's made in 4 separate strips that go vertically. And so you're doing color changes and switching texture each time. And you'll notice if you go onto my website and see the schematic for the pattern, you'll be able to see that there's a schematic for how many inches each strip should be, which color it should be, and which stitch type it should be. I'll do a close-up of the stitches for you before I get into my materials, because really this will work with any kind of yarn that you're interested in, because really what you're trying to do is make a certain size square or strip and use the stitch, and you can really make it very adaptable. So the first stitch that I use is the moss stitch. Where's a nicer example so you can see the definition. So the moss stitch is a very simple stitch. It's one of my favorite stitches to use in projects, and it makes a nice flat, even texture. And then the second one has a lot more sort of depth to it, and it is this one. It's called the grit stitch. It's still very simple. It's just single and double crochets. So nothing to be scared about. The moss stitch is single crochets and chains. So I'll tell you a little bit about the materials. For mine, I used an old classic that's local to me, Bernat Super Value. You can get this in a zillion different colors, and it's really cost effective to get. I needed 2 balls of this for each color, and it didn't really matter which color was my border color, because it just added just a little bit of yardage. So I used this, the colors that I used, this is the creamy white, off-white color. So this one's called Natural. Also on my blanket, the green is called Forest Green, and the brownish color, which has a really nice sort of texture to it as well, is called Taupe Heather. Is that right? Yes, Taupe Heather. So those are the 3 colors that I used, and on my border I chose to use color B, which is the Taupe Heather, on my border, but you can do whatever you'd like. The border is done in a crab stitch, which is a reverse single crochet. It may sound complicated, but it's not, and it actually works up really quickly. It's easy to go around. And in the corners, I just put 2 stitches in the corner, but this works up really nicely. The join that I used is the invisible mattress stitch, and the tutorial will cover how to do that once your strips are ready to join them together. But it makes a nice clean join, and the lines are really nice on this blanket. So yardage with my yarn, I ended up using for colors A and C, which are the colors that aren't on the border and not the color that you use to stitch up the vertical strips together. I used 350 grams or 800 yards of this, and this is an acrylic. It's 100% acrylic. And this is, sorry, it's a medium, it's a worsted weight acrylic yarn for those looking, and I'll put some links in my blog post as well. You can get this at all sorts of places, especially I'm in Ontario, Canada. It's manufactured here a lot of the time, and it's available in a ton of stores, including like I like to shop at Michael's, Lens Mill, even PV Mart has started carrying yarn. I don't know if you saw that. So if you have those chains available to you, Walmart often has Super Value, I think. So there's lots of options, and you can also get it online. So I'll include lots of links. For color B, which is for me the brown color, that's the color I chose to do the border with, just because of the aesthetic I wanted the overall blanket to have to match within my room. I used 375 grams or about 850 yards. So about 50 extra yards in order to do the border around. And it's just, my border is just one around, and there are options that I have in the pattern if you do want it a little bit thicker to be a little more pronounced. But the nice cool idea about this blanket is that it's got this sort of Moxie appeal where it's not just straight lines, but it's still a really nice, easy color block technique that you can use. What else can I tell you? So yeah, I use 6 balls of yarn. These are I usually get them on sale around $5 Canadian a ball. So it's a really cost-effective blanket. This is basically a $30 to $40 blanket. Other materials I used, I was using a 6mm J hook, if you will, a J10, 6mm crochet hook. I used a tapestry needle as usual to do the mattress stitching. And I used scissors in order to cut the yarn, and I think that's about it. Other than that, it was just a lot of, take some time to rank the panels. So once you build up the panels one by one and you follow the schematic that I'll provide in the video as well as on my blog post, once you follow the schematic, then it's simple, pretty easy, it's compact so you can travel with it because you're just doing 12-inch blocks up. Then what I did was I ended up joining with the invisible mattress stitch, then I put the crab stitch around, the reverse single crochet around, and then I blocked the entire thing to kind of give it its nice structured shape and its clean edges. But it's got some cool sort of Moxie to it, which is really exciting. And yeah, the stitches were moss stitch and grit stitch, and I'll show you how to do those in the rest of the video. What else? I think that's about it. I think it's time to get started. So the tutorial will show you how to start in moss stitch, how to switch from moss to grit. It'll also show you how to start in grit stitch and switch from grit to moss. And with those sort of 4 things, you'll be able to construct all of your panels. Then I'll show you how to sew them together. I'll show you how to do the border around, and you'll be good to go. Make sure that you are tagging me on Instagram and sharing on Facebook, Yarnworx Studio, that's Yarnworx with an X. And make sure that you tag me and use hashtag Moxie Block Blanket so that I can see all your finished items. So to start, we're going to look at how to get the moss stitch started. When I built the blanket, I worked it up from the rightmost panel over to the leftmost panel. You can do them in any order, but any panel that starts with the moss stitch, this is the instructions that you follow, depending on your gauge, but this is what I did. So to start, I made a slip knot. Again, I go over this a lot in my patterns, but I bring the yarn end, so the one that's at the end here that's loose, I bring it around from the front to the back and then cross it like this. Then I bring the working yarn, which is attached to the ball, up and over from the back. I grab where the loop is, pull it around, and there you've got your slip knot. And you can tighten it up, not too tight. I like to keep my chains pretty loose so that I don't end up with something too tight at the start. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna chain 39 for the moss stitch. 1, 4, 5, 6. So just to double check, in case you're not aware of what a chain is, you put the yarn over and you pull it through the loop that's on your hook. It's that simple. So that's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, need some more yarn, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. Okay, and there's my 39. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to single crochet into the third chain from the hook. So 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to put my hook into that stitch. With chains, you're always going up this top loop here unless it states otherwise. Yarn over, pull through. You'll have now 2 loops on, yarn over and pull through both. And that's a single crochet. What you're actually creating here is this little pocket that's like a chain space, because what this is it's a single crochet and then a chain and then a single crochet. So next is a chain, yarn over and pull through, very simple. Then you're going to skip the next stitch. Let me just get my needle out here so I can point. So this is where you put the single crochet. The next stitch is here, you're going to skip that one, so you're going to single crochet into the following one. So put it through, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. That's a single crochet. Again, you're going to chain, you're going to skip the next stitch and single crochet into the stitch after. So what you're creating here is you're creating these holes in between your single crochets. You're basically single crocheting every other stitch and chaining. So I'll take you all the way through to the end of this row, show you how to do your turn and start. What you'll find on your blanket is that the moss stitch panels, parts of the panels, will be thinner in width, even though they have the same sort of number of stitches. They'll be thinner, and so when you join it together, it creates a cool wave effect, which is what the Moxie from the blanket is. And it's a really cool just detail that's not too noticeable, so it's not like wacky, but it is a little modern twist or an unexpected twist on a straight color block blanket. And my kids have been going crazy on this blanket. They've been using it non-stop because a lot of our blankets have holes in them. So when you get to the end, you should be ending with a single crochet in the final stitch there. So you see I'm skipping this one. Let me just point with my needle again. I'm skipping this stitch here, and then this one is going to get the final single crochet, which is exactly what you want. And then to turn and keep going, let me just get a little more yarn. So I always turn and chain at the same time. Maybe I shouldn't. So I'm going to turn. For this, what we do is we chain 2 to start the next row, and then you're going to do your single crochets into the space that the chain created in the round below. So single crochet in there. Okay. Then you're going to chain and you're going to skip this single crochet, and then you're going to single crochet into the next chain space. So you're just going along and you are putting a single crochet into each chain space from the row before, and then doing a chain. And that creates this really nice effect where it's just sort of alternating stitches. And that's how you start a moss panel. And then you can just continue this same pattern where you turn at the end of the row, your single crochet, you turn, you chain 2, you go into the first chain space with a single crochet, and you just keep going. So that's how you do your moss stitch panels. And then the next video will show you how to switch from moss to gray mid panel. Okay, so I have finished my 5-inch color a moss stitch panel. So we saw how to start it from the start and how to do the rows. You can see it makes a really nice, a nice shape, a nice texture. And what I ended up doing, I did 18 rows, and I've got the measurements in the pattern, but it depends on your gauge. So what you want to do is look at your gauge and then see how many rows you need to do to make it 5 inches. But you can see here we're pretty much right on the money there with 18 rows. And we're ready to switch over to our grit stitch. So I'll show you how to do the transition from moss to grit. I'll just finish off the last couple stitches here. So I've got my single crochet in the chain space, chain 1, single crochet in the chain space, chain 1, and then you're always ending by putting it in this very last chain space. Now when you do your last single crochet, do the yarn over, pull it up, but then you're going to use your new color, which for me color B is brown, this brown color, and you're going to, you don't just slip knot or anything, you just put it over and pull that through. And then these become your yarn ends here, as if you have just one that you kind of tug for tension, and your working yarn continues in the brown, and that's a pretty seamless color transition. So to move on to the grit stitch, what we do is we turn our work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually break off the green, there we go, so that it's not in the way. Okay, so we turn our work, we've switched to color B, which for me is brown. And to start your grit stitch, you're going to chain 1, and then you're going to do double crochet into that same stitch. So that's yarn over, and then you go through the stitch. So when you're going through the stitch, again, you're putting your hook through so that there's sort of this V on the top. Then your yarn over back to front, pull it up. Now you have 3 on the hook. Yarn over, pull it through the first 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over, pull it through 2. And that is a double crochet. So what we've actually done is that first chain is acting as a single crochet, and then you've got a double crochet. And what we do is we then skip the next stitch. So now we're going into this one, which happens to be a single crochet, and do that across. So into all the single crochets across, which is every other stitch, you're going to work 1 single crochet and 1 double crochet. And I'll do that a little bit slower. I just wanted you to see what it looks like. So in the next single crochet, so we skip the chain space, go to the single crochet, go through the stitch, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2 for a single, and then you do the double in the same stitch, which is yarn over, then insert it into the stitch, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And you're going to continue that throughout. I'll do a few here, and I'll show you how to end the row. And again, with this one, it's so simple because every row is the exact same. There's no like 2-row repeat or anything like that. So you can see what we're doing here is every single crochet is now getting this cluster of a single crochet and double crochet in it. And that's going to form the basis for the transition into the grit stitch. So I'll skip forward to the end of the row and show you how we end it, and turn and show you how we keep going. All right, so when you get to the end here, when there's 1 single crochet left, that's where we're actually going to finish up. And we're just going to put a single crochet in there. And you can kind of see the whole work is slanting in this row over to this side. So by just ending it there, what we'll have is we'll end up with 18 sort of clusters plus the ending one. So then to turn, we are going to turn our work. We are going to again do 1 chain that acts as a single crochet, and then a double crochet into that same stitch, which is that single crochet that ended the row before. There we go. And again, we're going to go across, and we're going to do 1 single crochet, double crochet cluster, not really cluster, but 2 stitches into 1 into every single crochet. So skip this double and go into this single. You're going to do a single and then a double. Again, skip this one and you're going to go into this one with a single and then a double. Skip the double and go into the single with a single and a double. These words may sound confusing, but I promise you you'll get the hang of it. Basically, you're only ever actually putting stitches into your single crochets, and you just have to put 2 stitches into each one. Now this one works up in a totally different texture and may feel a little bit wider than your moss stitch. Don't worry about that. So we're coming close to the end here. Here's the last single crochet before we're at the end. So I'm gonna do my single and double in there. And then what I'm gonna do is at the very end, where that initial chain, turning chain was, we're just doing a single crochet. So don't also put a double, and that's just sort of anchoring it. And I can show you here, you might see stitches that look like this. This just needs a tug on the tension that you'll do when you actually work the yarns in. So that's how you end the row. Let's start another row just to make sure that we're clear on how it starts. Chain 1 to be kind of like a single crochet, and then put a double into that same stitch, which is this one right here, the very first one. And then work along again, going into the single crochets and always doing a single and then a double in the same stitch. And that will become the grit stitch. I still need to show you a grit stitch start and then a grit to moss. So I will show you that next. Okay, we're going to talk about how to build up the grit stitch as the start of a panel. For me, this is color C. It starts with color C is white. I'm going to start with a slip knot. So to do that, I hold my yarn end in my hands and my hook over here. I go around from front to back and bring it back forward again, creating this loop where the yarn end is coming in front. I kind of hold that in place just with my finger. I bring my working yarn, which is the yarn attached to the ball, up and around from the back to the front, and then I just pull that first loop over, and then I tug it, and that's my slip knot. You can have it loose, you can have it tightened, and that's why they call it a slip knot. So I try to keep my chain tension pretty loose. So I don't want to have it really tight up against it. I try to keep it pretty loose. And then what we're going to do is we are going to chain 38 for the grit stitch. Now you'll notice it's 39 for the moss stitch, and I'll show you what that looks like when we transition from one to the other. Okay, so here we go to chain. You go up and over, and then you pull that through, and that is a chain. It's as simple as that. Up and over again, back to front, and then you pull it through the loop that's on your hook. So that's 1, 2, 3. You keep going until you have 38. All right, so I have 38, and again, the goal is to have this be 12 inches wide, but I wouldn't recommend bothering to measure it quite yet, because you need to work a few rows before you can actually see how the fabric's going to work up when you're crocheting. So wait until you've gone a few rows, and then we can do a measure test and make sure that it's approximately 12. Blankets are very forgiving. A blanket like this design is very forgiving. So you'll be able to work around it if it's too bad, but then you check it before it's too late and you can pull it out and start again if you need to. Okay, so for the grit stitch to start it, what you're going to do is you're going to actually start with a double crochet in the second chain from the hook. So let me just get something to point with here. This V that you're seeing facing you is the first stitch, and then this one is the second stitch here. So you're going to go in here through that second stitch, but you're doing a double crochet, so you need to yarn over first, back to front, then go into that stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. What we've created here, we're using that first chain that we skipped, is kind of becoming a single crochet, and then this is becoming a double. We're going to skip the next chain, which is this chain here. We don't need to work into it. So our next stitches are going to go into here, and we're going to do a single crochet and a double crochet into the same stitch there. So skip one, single, which is put it through, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through both on the hook. And then a double in the same stitch, so where you just put that one, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through, over, pull through 2 loops, over, pull through 2. Skip the next one, and then in the next one, a single crochet, and then a double crochet. Okay. And we're going to continue in that pattern. So it's going to be skip a stitch, then do a single and double in the next one. Skip, single and double. And that is the basis of the grit stitch. So I'll come back to you when I'm near the end of the row to show you how to end it and turn it and start the next one. Okay, we've come near the end here. And we want to, when we get to the last 2, we're going to skip this one. And then in the very last stitch, we're only going to do a single crochet. And that kind of anchors the row for us. So there's our sort of foundation row of the grit stitch. Again, I would not measure it for width quite yet. I mean, if it looks really off, you can take a look, but I would do a few more rows beforehand. So let's learn how to turn the row. So turn your work. And then chain 1. This is going to act as a single crochet, and then in that same stitch we're going to yarn over and do a double crochet in here. It's the same as we've been doing, a single that counts as a single and then a double. And then we're going to skip the next stitch, which is the double crochet from the previous row, and into the single crochet, which is the next one, we'll do our single and our double. And so it's quite simply repeating that pattern again, only working in every other stitch, which happen to be the single crochets from the row before. Single and double. And you'll keep going along like this until you get to the end, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, you can see that I am at, there's sort of 2 groups left. So I'm going to do a regular one in the second last one, which is a single and then a double. And then I'm going to skip this double, and I'm going to do 1 single crochet in the turning chain that you did from the previous row. And that again anchors it. Then we'll flip it over, we'll turn, we'll start this row with the exact same way, a chain that counts as your single, and then put a double into that same stitch. And that starts it, and then we just go onward, and then you keep going for the duration of this size. And you can always do a width check after a few rows. I mean, I'll do one now just to see, to show you, but yeah, work up a few rows at least and then give it a try. Okay, so and 12 inches is what we're going for roughly. Let's see here. Try to keep it straight without stretching it. We are pretty much bang on. Don't be concerned if your grit stitch seems a little wider than your moss or vice versa. It'll all work out, trust me, it's very forgiving. And then I'll show you how to switch from grit to moss, and you'll have all the tools you need to make this blanket. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to switch from the grit stitch over to the moss stitch, wherever it calls for it in the pattern. So on your final row of grit stitch, you want to be working your last single crochet, which goes into the turning chain, and pull your yarn up. Then instead of completing the stitch, you switch to your color that you need to use for your moss. In my case, this would be color A I'm switching to. So you put that over the hook and then do your final pull through for your stitch, and that allows you to transition the color pretty nicely. You are going to turn, and now we're going to be starting the moss stitch. And again, the moss stitch looks like this, so it's a different texture, different feel, and has a slightly different way to start it up. So to start with the moss stitch, you are going to chain 2, and then in that same single crochet, you are going to do a single crochet, and then a chain, and then a single crochet, and a chain, sorry, that single crochet goes into the single crochet from the grit stitch. So you're always skipping one and then doing a single crochet, chain, skip one, single crochet. You're going to do that around, all the way across. When you get to the end here, what you're going to do is you're going to do one single crochet again in that turning chain, like so. And so that is your setup row for the moss stitch when you're transitioning from grit stitch up to moss stitch. And so now you turn and you're going to go into sort of your regular moss stitch mode where you chain 2 and then you start in the chain space between the single crochets and you do your single crochet there. This is explained in the other video that shows you how to start the moss stitch and work the moss stitch. And I'll just show you what to do at the end of this row, and then that will show you how you're transitioning, and you'll have the tools that you need to make the entire blanket, because then you just follow the schematic and figure out when you switch colors, how you switch colors, and you're always going either from moss to grit or grit to moss. And then making 4 panels. Once you've got your 4 panels complete, then we'll work on the finishing and assembly, and I'll be here and help talk you through that, of course. So here we go, close to the end. We've got that chain space, another chain. So what we're doing is we're just going to add one similar to before with the moss in this last chain space that you made with your chain 2 at the start of the row. Start of the previous row, and then you've got the right number of stitches on there. Again, you turn, chain 2. This is always what you do with moss, and then you start just in the first chain space, single crochet in there, chain, single crochet, chain, and away you go. And you'll keep continuing on like that for whatever duration you need, however many rows you need to get to the right number of inches for that color in the moss stitch on your blanket. Hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you at the end when you've got all your panels ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through now how to do the mattress stitch join of your strips. So I'm showing you here, this is an already joined section. So I've actually joined 3 of the panels together through 2 seams. I just want to show you what the join looks like. This is called the mattress stitch, and it's pretty close to an invisible seam, and it does look the same on both sides. So what you want to do when you're joining is you're going to hold 2 pieces together, and I'll show you that in a second. Now the color I chose for my border is the brown color, which is color B in my pattern. And I chose it for the border, so I'm going to use it to join the panels as well. And although you can't see it very much, it's not noticeable, you can see if you zoom in, you will be able to see a bit of that color. And that's going to happen no matter which color you choose. I don't think it's severe enough that you should try to join based on the colors that you're connecting, because then you'll end up with a lot more loose ends and a lot more chances for your blanket's integrity to be compromised. So here's how I do the join. It's called the mattress stitch, and I'll post some tutorials about it, some links that I use. But what I do is I get my working yarn, and I still have it attached to the ball, which is kind of nice about this. You don't have to guess how much you need to do your stitching. Where there's sometimes where you need to actually have the yarn disconnected, but this time you can just work out of the ball. So I'm going to thread my tapestry needle. All you need is your tapestry needle, your yarn, some scissors, and your working strips. I'm going to put my other strip together. Now with this blanket, it's reversible. It won't matter which way you join it, but you do want to make sure you're joining that starting at the right end of the top of the schematic. So this is the bottom of the blanket according to the schematic, and this is the bottom of my last strip, which is the leftmost strip. So it starts with the white grit stitch, and this is obviously green moss. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start from this side. You can start from either side, but I like to always go right to left because that's how I crochet as well. And what I found is easiest to do is to actually hold them up like this so that you've got sort of the seam together. And then to start, what you're going to do is you're going to leave the end loose, so it's going to be through your through the working yarn and connected to the ball. What I like to do to start it off is start on what I'm going to call this side the top and this side the bottom, even though they're just going to come out and be side by side. You want to go from I'm going to call this part here kind of the inside and this part the outside. So you've got top piece, bottom piece. You've got inside is where they come together, and the outside is where I'm holding it. So going from inside to outside, you're going to pick one down near the corner, and it doesn't matter how close you get to the corner because you can always stitch it a little bit tighter at the end of the process. And I went again from inside to outside. And then I'm going to do the same through the white, so sort of the bottom panel, and I'm going to go inside to outside. And that's really what the trick is the whole way through. So again, you don't want to be picking things up from the top of it. You want it to be along the seam. And you just want to be consistent in your spacing. So what I try to do is inside to outside on the top, grab a piece there, and then inside to outside on the bottom. So you're always just alternating between your two panels, inside to outside. There's lots of stitches that are sort of these big ones, especially on the moss. And then inside to outside. And again, don't stress out too much about how it's looking as you go, because it's going to tighten itself up. So when I'm looking at this and holding my panel together, I'm going to grab this one. I'm always grabbing ones as close to each other as I can, because that will make it lay really flat. I don't want to come and pick up something like way over here, and I just try to be consistent. So I'm always trying to grab similar loops along the way. And then like this is me joining a moss to moss. So it's pretty easy to get into a rhythm when it's the same stitch. But then just know when you get to grit, it's also going to kind of change the structure of what the side looks like. But the very cool thing about this blanket, and the reason I gave it its name Moxie, is that the panels, although they have the same sort of stitch count, they're kind of curved. So they compress, contract in when you're on the moss stitch, and kind of out when you're on the grit stitch. And there's different layout for each one. So it makes it have sort of this cool curviness rather than just being super linear. And I find that really interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I designed it that way. So now I've done a few stitches, you can see them here. What's going to happen as you go along, I would take more slack from your yarn, and then you can actually just pull it through, making sure you're not going to snap the yarn or anything. Whenever you need more stitching yarn at the front end that we're working in. And then as you go along, you need to make sure that before you secure off either side, you want to make sure that you actually pull it out and sort of stretch it out, because you don't want it to be super tight, because then it'll bunch. And what I'll do is I'll go all the way along. So you're just going to continue with the mattress stitch, going inside to outside, alternating between top and bottom panels, if you will, all the way along. And don't worry about the tightness or anything, just try to be consistent with your spacing. And then I'll come back at the end and show you what I do to finish it off at the top and bottom. So as you need more yarn, just pull it through all your existing stitches and you will be great. Okay, so I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so we have done our mattress stitch all the way along this panel. So kind of all 5 feet. And we're just at the end here. I figured I'd do the last couple stitches just to remind you of the process, and then we'll talk about the finishing aspects of the join. So again, we've got top, bottom, inside is where they come together, and the outside is where they're apart. So you're alternating from top to bottom. So I've done top here, next is bottom, and it's going from the inside to the outside of a stitch, and then top, inside to outside. When you get to the end, just make sure, probably from about a few inches away. Make sure that you're lined up at the top here. Now all your pieces should be 60 inches long, so you shouldn't have any problem with it, but just double check. And if you need to skip a few stitches along the way to sort of compensate for it, instead of at the end you just being off. And there's some forgiveness here too, because we have the border coming up, and the border can help sort of correct any uneven edges. Okay, so once you get to the very end, I like to always make sure I've got kind of the very top, and again the border will help take care of anything. Now before you want to secure this end, and I'll show you how to do it, what you want to do as you've been pulling the yarn through all the way along is you want to be, you want to tug at it and make sure that there's no tight stitches, and you'll feel them when they happen. Like I just felt one there, and so I'm going to keep pushing it down. It's almost like when you're wringing water out of a towel. Go all the way along the seam, right to the edge, and you can see it bunching up here. That means that's the extra tension that we're pushing out. All the way to the edge. Sort of totally knocked my camera there. Right to the very edge, and you're just pulling. I've got the yarn attached to the ball here, so you're just pulling it to make sure that it's nice and loose, because you don't want it to be tight, because when it's tight, that's where your blanket can start bunching up. So you just want to make sure that it's not pulled tight. So you do that, and then all you want to do is fasten off. So with a needle, what I typically do, and again, you don't have to be too picky here because the border's going to cover this part up, is I'll go through sort of both ends, bring it up into a nice circle. Let me show you the circle. There we go. And then come up through the circle and pull it tight. Then take your scissors and snip it. I like to give a few inches just to make sure that you have lots of space to sort of hide the loose ends, which I'll also go over with you. And then I go to the other side, and I've still got it attached to the ball of yarn. So again, give it a couple inches and snip. And then making sure that nothing's too tight along the seam. You don't want it really loose and bulky either, because you want it to be kind of visible. Thread my needle, which always goes worse when I'm trying to film. Usually I just squeeze the ends, push a bit through. I'm sure there are tools for this, but I never have problems. So, okay, so on the other end again, this is where if you didn't quite grab the edge to make a nice flat edge, I think this looks pretty good. Then you can correct it by grabbing it again, but I'm just going to go under 2 things of yarn, pull my yarn all the way through, go through this circle here like this, pull it up to make a knot, and that's ready. And then let's just open it up to check our work. It should lie nice and flat, and it should be very hard to see the seam. And from far away, it's going to look really nice. Your corner should be really nice. And then we can flip it over on the back and check as well there. Looks great. So now I've got the whole blanket put together with all the panels. I did weave my ends in before I actually joined. What I can do is, let me see if I can find a spot that has, perfect, okay. I will show you how I weave in ends, just so that you have that as part of your repertoire as well. You want to take all your loose ends and make sure you weave them in nicely so that they don't pop out. So I'll show you how I do it. I always, where I can, weave them into the same color. So this is brown thread or brown yarn. I'm going to weave it into the brown section. So what I do is I always work my way through the yarn. And I'm looking for places like this where I can go under multiple stitches, and I keep going under stitches, whether I need to go on an angle or straight across. And so what I'm doing is finding basically a hole that I can go through as much as I can till I have something like that would fill the needle. Then I pull the yarn through. I don't pull too tight because that's going to make it too high tension. Then, and I'll try to zoom in here, I go over top of the last loop that I pulled through, which is this one here, over top of that one, but then I just follow the same path under the same ones again, all the way through. And again, it depends on what you're comfortable with, but this I know is more than enough for me. I pull it all the way through, tug my yarn so that that end kind of hides in. I kind of tug it both sides so that I know it's not too tight. And then I come and I snip this as close as humanly possible. And then when you tug on it, that yarn end is just in there. And very, very rarely does it actually pop out for me. So that's the technique that I use to do all my ends getting woven in. I don't actually have to weave these ends in because I'm probably going to stitch over them as I do my border, which will be next. So yeah, I think what we've done here is we've got all 4 panels joined together. We've got the mattress stitch going to sew up all those panels in place, and we've got the loose ends woven in other than where you stitched your panels together. So the last step is going to be doing the actual border, and in this case it's a crab stitch, which is called a reverse single crochet. So I'm going to show you that next, and then we'll have a finished blanket to take a look at. Okay, to do the border for the blanket, we're using the reverse single crochet stitch, also called a crab stitch. What I like to do is I like to start it somewhere along a flat edge so that you can join it up nice and cleanly later. And then your corners are nice and sharp too. So what I've got here, I've got the right side of the blanket facing me, and I'm at the bottom of the schematic, moving towards what would be the left side when you look at the schematic, so the bottom left corner. So the thing about working reverse single crochet is that you actually work from left to right instead of right to left, and that is where the reverse comes from. So to get started, put a slip knot on your hook. Let me just do it quickly in case you forget. At least this is how I do it. I put the working yarn from front to back and then bring it back in front, forming a little cross there. And then I take the working yarn again. This is my yarn end. I'm going to put it over and then pull the loop through and pull it tight. And that is my slip knot. I've got my 6mm crochet hook, same hook I used for the blanket. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to slip a stitch, so put it through a stitch, yarn over, and pull it through both loops on the hook. And then I'm going to tuck my yarn end to go over to the right, and my working yarn is back here. Okay, and it's going to feel weird at the start, but once you get in the groove of it, I'm telling you this is a breeze, and it's going to make a nice, simple, small border. And again, I chose to use color B. You can choose whatever color you like or play with it. So let's see here. To start, I'm going to yarn over chain 1 just to bring it up a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to be working in each stitch across and keep it pretty evenly spaced. So I'm going to go into this next hole, and what I'm doing is I'm keeping the yarn kind of over here. I'm going to grab that yarn and bring it up through, and then I've got 2 on my hook. Oh, I've missed the yarn. Of course, as soon as I start the video. Okay, sorry. I'm going to go in the stitch. I'm going to grab the yarn and pull it through like this, and then turn my needle up. It's kind of twisting it a bit. Yarn over and pull through, and that's my reverse single crochet. Into the next one, so getting into the next one just feels a little awkward. You go through, pull the yarn up, twist, and there you go. And let's do a few more and then we'll take a look. But it's just like single crochet, you just get into a groove. It just feels different because you're going backwards instead of forwards. So they also call this the crab stitch. What we're going to do is we're going to do it all the way around, and we're going to do 2 in the corners. So do 2 in the same stitch in the corners, and it's as simple as that. So let me get through at least over to the white part, and you can see here I have quite a bit of separation from here to here, but that's no problem because as soon as I do my reverse single crochet into it, I'll just keep moving on, and that will help it even out. So there, I've done a few. You can see it's just a simple, clean, rounded edge border. Looks great, looks really simple, gives it a nice finish to it. Looks great on the back as well. If you did want to do something that was a little more thick or noticeable, I'm trying to keep it pretty clean. But I'm just going to pull out my sample that I did, my sort of test blanket. Because on this one, although it's much smaller in scale obviously, what I actually did was I did a whole round of just single crochet around the entire thing. And then I did the reverse crochet, single crochet or crab stitch. So if you do want it to be more pronounced, that is an option, and it's pretty simple to do as well. Again, I would just make sure that you do 2 single crochets in each corner just to give it a little buffer, and then do everything else like normal and go all the way around. So I'll come back with the finished item. Okay, so we have gone almost all the way around the entire border, and in the corners what we've done is just put 2 reverse single crochets in the corners just to kind of come around. And so I'm just going to show you how to get to the very end. What I'm doing right now is I'm just actually going over this loose end as I stitch, so don't worry about that, and then I'll tie this loose end in and show you how to finish it off. But by the time you get to this point in the blanket, if you've gone all the way around in the crab stitch, you should be pretty good at it. And basically, when it comes to being sort of consistent, just make sure you have a consistent way that you go across so that it looks nice and even. And other than that, it's a pretty simple stitch to work through. So what I like about this edge is it gives it a nice, almost rounded feel, and it works up pretty quickly actually. So I'm coming up to the last stitches here. So this stitch is the stitch that I joined in originally, joined with my slip stitch. So I'm going to do a stitch there, and then I'm just going to go into this last stitch, was the first one that I did my reverse single crochet in. There we go, just to make sure that it's full. And then what I'm going to do is cut my yarn, leaving a nice long end for weaving in. I'm going to fasten off there. And then I'm going to take my tapestry needle, thread it with my end here. I'm actually just going to run this through underneath, like kind of tunneling through the middle of several stitches. Pull it through. That'll make it have a nice clean finish at the end there. And then just like when I'm weaving in a regular loose end, I'm going to go over top of that last one that I went under it last to finish. This single one here, let me just grab it for you. That. I'm going to go over top of this one, but then back through all the same ones that I came through when I pulled it through before. Pull it back through so you can see it. Pull my needle out. Take my scissors, pull it a little bit tight. It's going to be very close to the stitch. And this will just fade in, and then it will be done. And then overall, you'll want to weave in all your various loose ends. So some of them I've already woven in place. You can see them there. This one I'm going to take, so I'll just do that for you in case you want to see it in action one more time. It should be one of the few that I have left to deal with. So I'm just going to go through the back this time to show you what that would look like. Again, I'm just going through sort of the middle of the stitches behind all the loops that are exposed. Pull it through, all the way through. There we go. And then go over top of the last one that you went through, which was this one. And then back underneath all the rest. This is a pretty foolproof method as long as you've got enough length to go through. What you don't want to end up with is you don't want to end up with not enough yarn to go through enough stitches. And here I do see that, oh, that's just my other end that I finished. So once you're done, what you'll end up with is this really clean, sort of rounded edge, small, subtle edging that goes all the way around and makes a really nice shape. So the last steps for the blanket, if you choose to block it, once you sort of lay it out, see how flat it is, see what you think about the edges. If you want to block it, you can totally do that. If you use acrylic like I've used here, I would steam block it. So pin it down onto something and then use a steamer or the steam from your iron to block it. There's not a lot of sense in wet blocking acrylic yarn because it won't really make that much of a difference. It'll take a long time to dry. But steaming is where it's at if you want to shape it. And otherwise, just enjoy your blanket. You've got a big, beautiful, color blocked Moxie blanket. So yeah, thanks for taking the time to step through it with me. And you can always come back to my tutorial or go on to the blog, and especially go and support Connected to the Land, where they've got a ton of great content for all sorts of outdoor, at home, DIY tips and tricks. They have cooking, they have seedling gardening, all sorts of great stuff. So go check them out, Connected to the Land. They're on Facebook, they have a website, and support their content too. Thanks so much and enjoy your Moxie Block Blanket.